Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we embark on the third of 5 sessions on technologies of hope. We have a surprise for everyone as we begin our program today. Normally, I do a little reflection on the subject of the day, but today we want to bring in someone who was one of the co-founders of Humanity Rising, Rick Buckley, who was our Chief Technology Officer for Humanity Rising, and along with Georg Bach, was holding space of the technology of the Zoom broadcasts. And then in late April, after working together with me day by day for over 2 years, Rick succumbed to a stroke and was hospitalized and has been recuperating in Mill Valley, California. And Rick and his wife, Karen, contacted me last week saying that Rick was getting back into good form and that he wanted to join us and say hello. So I see Rick on the screen. Rick, I just want to welcome you back and have you say whatever words of greetings that you would like to our audience.
Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
And how are you feeling? Tell us how you're feeling.
I'm feeling a lot better than I was in April. Everything's coming back slowly. I still don't have use of the left side of my body.
And are you able to work a computer with one hand or make telephone calls or?
Right. Yeah, my son set up my computer to be a one-handed right person.
Well, that's good. That's good. And you know what, we've been, as you know, because everyone, I've been visiting Rick from time to time since we're neighbors and very good friends. We go back a long, long way. Our children knew each other and went to school together in Mill Valley, California. So Rick has been really at the heart of the development of Ubiquity University since very near the beginning. And then, as I mentioned, was really a pillar for technical support of Humanity Rising, and was also working with us in terms of outreach to various strategic partners, particularly the Sign network. So there's a lot of your friends that have been rooting for you, Rick, and just would welcome you to say anything you would like to say to your friends who've been loving you and sending prayers. And
Karen and I appreciate all the support and the emails and letters and calls that we've received. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Rick, this is George. Great to see you.
Hi, George. I can't see you, but great to hear your voice.
Here I am.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
And Peter, you should come on.
What's that?
Peter Mary is one of the presenters today, and George and Tom. It'd be nice just to say hi to Rick.
Hey, George. Hi, Tom.
Rick, delightful, just so delightful to see you. God bless you.
See you guys again. Everybody looks younger.
It's the new cameras.
Yeah. You look good, Rick. You look good. That's terrific.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments in the chat. It's great to see your smile, Rick, and it is. It really is.
Okay, everyone, we'll move on with our program, and Rick, you're welcome to watch. And we just love you dearly, and we pray for you every day, and look forward to the time when you can come back and join the team again. And just know we're holding that space for you whenever it happens.
We're getting there quickly.
I'm sure you are. You've got thousands of people all over the world that are sending all love and strength. So be well, brother.
Every day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
So everyone, let us just hold Rick in love and tenderness as he recuperates day by day. You know, strokes are debilitating, but they're remedial. It's a strange thing. The brain, the body has a lot of neuroplasticity. So we're not in a situation that is conclusive. We're in a situation that is malleable. And through prayer and through love and through the clarity of intention and will, all kinds of good things are happening. Let us just pause before we begin our program and breathe together as we always do. You'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear that bell, just begin to breathe in. You'll hear another bell and just breathe out. We're going to take 10 breaths together to reach coherence. And let us, as we breathe together, everyone, hold Rick in our hearts and send good breath to our brother. Georg? Thank you, everyone. It's good to feel as one, particularly when we're in prayer and in common intention to one of our extended family in need of all of our love and support. So thank you. Thank you all. It's my pleasure now to welcome my good friends and colleagues, George Cappannelli, the founder and CEO of Age Nation, and Tom Eddington, the founder and CEO of Endangered Species, Endangered Global, who've been working for a very long time now as partners in the development of Humanity Rising and have been convening a number of absolutely stellar sessions, the most recent one we're in now on the technologies of hope. So thank you, gentlemen, and I turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Jim. And Rick, so good to have you here. So this is the third day, as Jim said, in our Technologies of Hope series. You know, we're living in a time where since innovation and various forms of technology have been present throughout history. And for a large period of that time, individuals were working in collaboration with natural law and evolving what we've come to know as the wisdom traditions. And then, of course, in the 17th century, with the beginning of the first phase of the Industrial Revolution, we took a kind of side path in which many thought that technology was going to be the panacea and the answer to every challenge. And it certainly became the child of power and profit in many ways. And so recently, over the last several decades at least, we've come to recognize that technology has a shadow side, or at least its use has a shadow side. And so we now find ourselves in a particularly challenging time. So we decided to do this Technologies of Hope series because there are remarkable people out there that are doing things with technology that are actually mitigating some of the challenges we face and that do offer hope. And as we talked about on Monday, trust. So those of you who haven't had a chance to view Monday's program or yesterday's program, I really encourage you to do it. Monday, a wonderful program with Andrew Bailey and Brian Van Herzen and Joe Brewer and Lila June Johnson on regeneration was really wonderful, and you should see it. And yesterday we spent some time with David Schmidt and his team from LifeWave on conscious wellness technologies. And today we're really delighted to have two individuals with us who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before I do, Tom, would you like to open with some remarks?
Yeah, thanks, George. One of the things that's really struck me this week is the number of panelists who brought consciousness into the conversation, and recognizing that human consciousness has the opportunity to evolve. And we're seeing some extraordinary leaders and scientists and researchers and others who are bringing consciousness into their work. And it's being reflected in that the indigenous voices from around the world are for the first time speaking up, because they feel like it's the first time we have been able to hear them and hear their messages. And so I love the conversations this week on technology and integrating consciousness into it from a perspective of regeneration, from a perspective of being with nature in a very different way, and more conversations around regeneration and nature-based solutions. And so it does feel like we're at this point. I mean, granted, we're at a dire place because of human activity on the planet, but we're at this point where people are finally willing to listen. And so I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today with Karsten and Peter.
So we have two terrific guests. I want to warn you, though, before they come on, that they are both weird and wicked. And you're going to have to make up your mind what that means and how that relates to the consciousness of technology that is our topic today. So Peter, Karsten, if you would turn on your videos, please. Peter, Dr. Peter Murray, some of you are familiar with him for his incredible work with Ubiquity. He's also, throughout his life, been involved with helping people, especially as a teacher, originally in a secondary school in rural Ghana, and then co-founding an online global learning platform with Ubiquity. He's also one of the world's top experts on leadership. He's a recognized public speaker on themes of organization and leadership, especially in times of major transition, which are often referred to as non-linear change. And so Peter's going to talk to us about why this quest to discover how we can make the greatest possible impact as quickly and effectively as possible is now part of his world. Karsten Ormond is an expert in holistic leadership transformation. He's got an extensive business background, having been a partner and a global board member of a leading consulting and IT professional services company with over 40,000 employees worldwide. And then all of a sudden in 2012, he decided to get a real job. And he began to dedicate his life to what he now calls a far more meaningful purpose. And Karsten's going to tell us about how he acts as a catalyst for personal, organizational, and global paradigm shifts today. So, Peter, would you begin first and just give us a brief overview on your work and your purpose, and Karsten the same, and then we'll get into a really good dialogue on what consciousness technology is and why it's so important.
Sure. Thanks, George. I should say, and Karsten is my colleague in Weirder Tech, which is an initiative we're starting up, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the relevant bits, I think, of my context is have it really come to the conclusion that the essence of our challenge as humanity is that we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness. And we need to remember that as quickly as possible, not just cognitively, but in a very embodied way. Because once we have kind of literally re-internalized that and healed this illusion of separation, then we just enter choiceless choices, which are bound to be more healing and positive for life as a whole. And so this journey into these technologies we're going to talk about today, for me, is because when people start to engage with them, they can't but accept that there is some level of interconnectedness that they haven't yet been aware of, and that our traditional education system and culture doesn't recognize. So that's the real purpose behind what we're doing with Weirder Tech, is getting technologies into meeting rooms and into households that are psychoactive in the sense that they continually remind us of the nature of our interconnectedness.
Thanks. And eventually you're going to talk a lot more about wicked and weird, right? So that our audience. Good. Karsten, just a quick overview, if you would, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I'm Karsten Ormann. I'm based in Germany, and as George has said, I try to be a catalyst for a global paradigm shift, literally. And looking at the levers, I think that leadership is a huge lever. Business and other leaders are huge levers as multipliers if we would want to change the worldview, as I call it. I call the old worldview the materialistic worldview, the red worldview, and the new worldview the green worldview, just to make it easy when I speak about that. So the green worldview is based on consciousness, as Peter has already said. And I'm coming from a technical background. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm very much into natural sciences. I'm very analytical. I try to develop solutions out of the basics of natural science, basically, and then really bring it into the market. So I'm not a believer. Hence, I was putting a lot of effort into trying to understand how reality really works and the nature of interconnectedness that Peter has already mentioned. I think it is an essential question to ask, how does reality work, if we want to answer the question who we are, which is a famous question in the wisdom traditions. And I try to understand both, because only if you understand the nature of reality, you can understand who we are, and only then we can actually really develop our full potential as human beings. So that's sort of in a nutshell what I'm doing.
Oh, thanks. Peter, in one of your descriptions about the wicked world of conscious technology, you talk about the fact that science is beginning to catch up. I mean, it's interesting that science for a long time thought it was so far ahead, and it's now discovering that, there have been a lot of people walking on this path before them, and it's time now to come together in a kind of unified field. But talk about what is the wicked world of conscious technology?
The weird world, the weird
world. Yes.
So, well, just to start with weird, W-Y-R-D, it was the Anglo-Saxon kind of Viking Celtic term in Northwestern Europe for the web of interconnectedness that created all life. Like, we buried it so deep in Northwestern Europe that we had to import terms like chi and everything from the East, because we couldn't recover our own indigenous tradition of interconnectedness until Brian Bates, who was a professor at Sussex University, discovered a manuscript in the British Library that had been written by one of the first monks to be on the British shores, who was sent out by the abbot to find out what the pagans were up to. What was all this magic stuff that they were doing? And so he headed off. And of course, the local sorcerer knew he was coming and had prepared for him a whole initiation process in this tradition. And so this young monk got initiated in the kind of sorcerer's pathway, this Anglo-Saxon sorcerer. And then he went back to the monastery and he wrote it all down. And that document still exists in the British Library. And Brian Bates found it, took it, and then he wrote a book called The Way of Weird. That is a kind of fictional story based on that manuscript. And so when I remembered that, my sense was that weird could be a really cool meme to try to reawaken in the consciousness, particularly in kind of Northwestern Europe, where it's indigenous, rather than have to import concepts from the East that we can kind of get away with of thinking, oh, they're kind of cute because they come from somewhere else. When we realize that actually from the land that we're living on, there was already this tradition of weird, then it has a different effect. And the original, there was actually a rune, if I hold this up, you can see the original rune for weird, these staves of interconnectedness. And I saw in that the possibilities for doing some very cool branding and playing with the rune to try to reawaken at a precognitive really level and transcognitive this sense of, and this tradition of interconnectedness that we have. And of course, a lot of the folks who now live in North America would have come from this part of the world as well. So and Australia. So the whole weird tradition, is actually deep in our collective consciousness. So that's why it felt like a good word to use as we looked at how do we take this work at Princeton that I can talk about if you want, and bring that into the modern world now and make it accessible to people.
Please do talk a little about that Princeton tradition.
I mean that's what kind of really has got us to weirder tech is, and in the early 1970s at the School of Engineering at Princeton University, Professor Robert Yan was the dean of the School of Engineering. And a student came to him and had picked up on the work that was being done at Stanford, looking at how our intention seems to affect the world around us, and particularly these devices. And he was pretty skeptical, but it was a good enough proposal for a project. So, being a real scientist rather than one that dismisses it because he doesn't understand it or it doesn't fit his worldview, he let the student go ahead and do this project. And the student came back, with results that seemed to confirm what they'd found at Stanford, which was indeed that the mind, without being physically connected to a machine, can actually influence it. And the student went on to other things, but this stuck in Bob Yarn's consciousness. And as I say, being a real scientist, he couldn't get around it. So he decided to set up a research lab to look into that. One of the things that happened early on is one of the airplane manufacturers he was talking to who build fighter aircraft. When they were in conversation and Bob was sharing this, the CEO said, well, yeah, I mean, we all know this. We all know that when the pilots get into a state of stress, they seem to influence the instruments on the cockpit. So if you can find out what's going on there, you know, that would be really valuable to us. So, you know, here's some initial funding to do the research. So that's what initiated the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research pair. And it was to explore the anomalies that didn't fit within the current scientific and engineering mindset. Bob Yarn very quickly brought on a woman called Brenda Dunn to work the more human and psychological side of it, while he worked the engineering side. And together, over 28 years, they experimented with how human intention can affect what should be otherwise random events. And they started with mechanical devices. So they had a big random mechanical cascade that lots of balls kind of cascade through and then distribute in a random curve if you don't affect them in any way. And then they would just have people sit in front of this cascade and try to influence the balls moving left or right, and found that consistently they were getting statistically significant effects. It's not that kind of all the balls suddenly fall one side, but there were consistent small effects that built a significant statistical significance. And so they then went on, they developed other experiments, and then built these random event generators, which are basically electronic coin flippers that flip kind of zeros and ones very, very fast, so that you get a field, a random field of 50-50 of each. And then they would have people try to influence that randomness through an interface on a screen, for example, where a line would either be going up or going down. If it was random, it would go along the middle. And then the people would try to make it go up or make it go down, which was more ones or more zeros. And that meant they were able to run thousands and thousands of trials and show that regardless of how physically proximate people were to these devices, that they were able to influence them with statistical significance. They also did lots of other research around remote perception and things, and but they had to do it all according to the proper academic and scientific protocols, published it in journals, and of course the community was skeptical, and so kept demanding that they become stricter with their protocols, which they did. And by the end of the 28 years, they'd basically proved beyond statistical doubt, 1 in a billion being the chance that what they found was chance, that the human mind influences otherwise random events in the world around us. And so that closed, the lab closed in 2007. Bob Yarn passed away a number of years ago, and Brenda Dunn just earlier this year, actually. So she was with us at the first Science and Consciousness event last year that we ran with Ubiquity at Broughton in the UK. And so what happened was that I got to know Brenda when I was doing my PhD at Ubiquity. And at some point she was telling me about all this technology and saying it was all in storage in Princeton and costing them a fortune, and said, could I do anything with it? It was a typical Brenda question. And I just met a guy in England who owns a 3,000-acre estate that had been in the family for 1,000 years. And he was wanting to transform it into a place of transformation. And so my consciousness made the connection. So I called Roger Tempest and said, hey, how would you like all this equipment from Princeton? Why don't we set up a public experience space that people could walk into and directly experience their mind influencing these technologies? So he liked the idea, which led to us shipping all of this technology, the whole Princeton library from PAIR, all of the research papers and original data across the Atlantic to its new home in the Yorkshire Dales at Broughton, which we called Weird Experience. And so that's where it sits now. And part of what we're working on next, which we can talk about in a bit, is technologies that we can develop based on that research. And that's what Weirder Tech's been set up for. So I don't know if Karsten, if you want to add anything from the story, because Karsten's very familiar with the history and the context as well.
Yeah, it's probably just worth mentioning. So I met Brenda in person in the preparation phase for a conference of the SSE, the Society of Scientific Exploration, of which I'm an associate. And we were planning and organizing that conference in Boulder, Colorado, in mid of 2019, and the subject of that conference was consilience. And consilience, we all know the term resilience. Resilience means sort of jumping back. So silience is jumping and re is back, and consilience is jumping together. So the topic of that conference was how all of these scientific bits and pieces, all of these pieces of the jigsaw would actually sort of jump together to form this coherent, bigger picture, which gives us an understanding of the nature of reality. And when we were preparing for that, I had asked Bill Bankston, the former president of the SSE, all right, who do you think is one of the leading figures? I wanted to pull panelists together for the conference. And so I got in touch with Brenda and with Steen Radin and with a number of other leading figures in this field. And out of that, basically, there was a friendship developing between Brenda and myself, and she visited me over here in Germany and so on. So we've kept in touch. And at one day, she basically told me about the story that Peter has just shared with us, that there is that they have moved all of this stuff to Broughton, to the UK, and that this is going to be revitalized, which is a great kind of opportunity. I mean, just imagine you have got a sort of groundbreaking research activity at Princeton University, right? And in the engineering department, and I cannot just stress this more, because as an engineer, engineering department, this is far, far away from any kind of belief and spiritual things. This is all about facts and trying to figure out where the underlying mechanics are, right? So I think it's a great opportunity that we basically can maintain these roots of that consciousness-based research and can make it available to the public in the weird experience at Broughton Hall. So I think it's just brilliant. So another member of the team is working on getting these kind of gadgets again to work, so that we can actually show them how they worked. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's catapulting us back around 50 years in time, but it's essential, because people ought to understand what is the scientific base of what we are then trying to, or what is the scientific foundation of what we are then trying to develop in terms of really maturing the technological applications of it.
Oh, thank you both. You're both familiar with Dr. Larry Dossey's work and the work that Doc Schilder and his group at HeartMath with their heart-head coherence and all the rest of it. And it's so long after the time when the world should be aware of this stuff. And so what you're doing is really phenomenal. How does that translate into the leadership work that you have both done? How does that connect?
Well, maybe, George, I can just share a little bit of the things we're thinking of producing, because it's those that we will use as kind of Trojan horses into the leadership world, to remind people, as it were, of this interconnectedness. So if that's okay, shall I just jump through a few slides, and people will get a feeling for, what we're up to. So weird attack. So here, by the way, you can see how we're playing with the weird rune, with the logo and things. This is really just to summarize the reason that why develop these technologies. Isn't it that great Gandalf quote? You just got to decide what to do with the time you have. But this feels to me that if we can get technologies into houses, into boardrooms, into decision-making places, then it will, it will kind of short circuit, in a way, the rational mind's belief that everything is separate, because there's no, it'll be continually reinforcing a new belief in some kind of field that is transmitting information between people without any physical connection between them. So the first product we're thinking of developing is a lamp. This was like they first developed coming out of Princeton. They called it a mind lamp. And this was a lamp that you could influence the color of with your mind. So it has a random event generator in the bottom, and then you can circle through the colors. And I've got one sitting on my desk here. And but the company who was producing them basically stopped producing them. They weren't really, they were more into the engineering, weren't so much into the business side of it. And so we're picking up where they left off, but playing at the moment with this idea of a genie lamp in terms of the magic of being able to transform the color. My kids, were able to do it easier than anybody else. They'd kind of come in and I'd say, all you have to do is imagine the lamp's red. Boom, they'd imagine it and it would turn red. And they were kind of, oh, that's cool. Then they'd go off and do something else. So, but, I've used the lamps in rooms where you have half the room competing to make it blue and half to make it red. And you give them tips on how intention works. And it's a playful way. And then they kind of course, they go away going, well, how the hell did that work? Because no one taught me the physics of the field, essentially. So this second one, the genie, us, and this is all kind of a draft at the moment. But one of the things they found during the Princeton research is that when you had a group of people together and they were aligned around a shared purpose, and they were in coherence together, that influenced the randomness in the field. So it brought structural patterns into the random field. The more coherent the group was, the stronger the collective purpose and the collective intention. So remember, that's what the research is doing the whole time. It's having a random starting point and then looking at how things influence that otherwise random field, which, according to traditional science, should simply not be possible. So these are quantum random devices encased and protected against any other form of possible intervention from the material sciences, let's say. And so there's no way anybody should be able to influence these things, but these things do get influenced in ways which you can correlate with individuals' intentions, but also collective intentions. So we're thinking of a lamp that will sit in a meeting room or a group process and will glow more the more coherent and aligned the group becomes, and will dim down the less coherent or aligned the group becomes. So in the same way that we have biofeedback for our bodies, this is what I'm calling socio-feedback. So it will entrain us to notice, what do we do that lifts group coherence and collective wisdom and intelligence? And what do we do that drops it, basically? So when do you want to be making a decision as a group? You want to be making a decision when the lamp is glowing at its brightest, because you know the greatest collective intelligence is in the room and the group is most aligned behind the shared purpose. So this is the group one that we're thinking of. And Lynn McTaggart was with us last year at the first Science and Consciousness event and was very excited about this and getting it to all of what she calls her groups of 8 in the power of 8. So these are groups that come together to share intentions, particularly around healing. And so you should be able to see in those groups, particularly the effects of their intentions on these lamps.
I would imagine, Peter, if the lamp were big enough, we could put one in the Capitol in Washington so the nation could tell, where the fools were at and what they were doing and not doing,
You get us that contract, George, then that'll be a lot of fun. What you can imagine, just before I go on the back of this, of course, is a whole bunch of consulting stroke training stroke education offerings, right? Like, how do you get your lamp to glow? How the hell do we get into collective coherence? Well, that's what a lot of us, probably a lot of people on Humanity Rising, have made their work. And suddenly it's going to become the big thing. Like, how do we train ourselves to get to our highest joint collective purpose and collective intelligence? On the back end, of course, you can build all sorts of educational offers and little training programs and other things, but you can imagine a whole world of consulting and training growing up around the products as well. So this actually came out of the COVID experience, where the second most important and damaging effect after the physical effects was the isolation. People's loneliness and belief that they were isolated, which of course, if we understand that everything's interconnected through a field, they weren't isolated at all. They were still interconnected with everything, but just not in a way that you could physically see. So we're thinking of doing these pairs of lamps, where let's say I could have one in my room, George, and you could have one in your room. And whenever I think of you, your lamp would glow. So imagine having, you could have different types of lamp. You could have, imagine your mother's somewhere, living somewhere else, and you don't see her for long, but every time you think of her, her lamp glows. Or anytime she thinks of you, your lamp glows. All they would need is an internet connection for the data transfer of the random event generators. But this is all completely possible. This isn't fantasy. This is what we're actually coding the software for at the moment, and should have the first products out next year. So other ideas, and this is part of Brenda's wish list. So one of the things they created at Princeton was a little robot that ran around a table in a random pattern, and you would try to influence the robot to move closer to you or to move further away from you. And again, statistically significant results. That was based on an experiment that was done with chicks, where the chicks, when when chicks are born, the first thing they see is the mother, and so they connect to the mother, as it were. And instead of having the mother hen there when the chicks hatched, they put a little robot in there. And so the chicks thought, this robot must be my mother. And so they formed an attachment to the robot. And then what they did is they kept the chicks in the corner of this field and released the robot, which was to program to go in a random pattern around the field. And what happened was that the robot spent a lot more time closer to the chicks than it should have done scientifically and randomly, which proved that somehow the chicks were having a pull on this robot. So that's very interesting, because one of the things it's showing us is that this ability to influence the reality around us is not about being massively enlightened as such and sitting there and meditating the whole time. There's obviously a deeper precognitive energy. You could think lower chakra energies that need to be activated as well to make it work, because these chicks weren't kind of Buddhist monks or anything. They were just chicks with an attachment to the robot, and they were having this effect on the random field. So that's a very interesting thing to contemplate. We're going to be developing the systems for researchers. So a research technology where people can take and have the software and everything to be able to do the analysis. One of the ideas is a mini desktop random mechanical cascade, so where these balls drop through and see if you can influence them. The pet treat dispenser is a fun one. So they found in the US that they attached a treat dispenser to a random event generator, basically. And I think it was the raccoons, wasn't it, Carsten, if I remember rightly? The raccoons learnt to manipulate the random event generator, which, remember, traditional science says can't be affected by anything. It's a quantum random system. It can't be affected by anything. These raccoons were able to manipulate the random event generator to release the treats. So again, that's not, that's telling us something about the nature of the energy that's used to influence the random fields. The plant-like one is actually my favorite and one I want to get set up at the Weird Experience. So they had they put a bunch of plants in a dark room and they hung up lamps that were on a dimmer switch, and they connected the dimmer switch to a random event generator. And what they found the plants did is the plants started to regulate the amount of light they needed through the random event generator and the dimmer switch. So, we think this intelligence is only limited to humans, but we've seen animals influence these random event generators, plants influence these random event generators. And so again, it's telling us something about the quality of consciousness that is needed to influence the field that would otherwise be random and increase the probability of something manifesting, which is basically what they were doing. And of course, what we'd want to do is tie all of this into an app where you could continually get feedback on your performance, let's say, and get tips, just like you might do with some of these biofeedback systems and the apps, which say, okay, your heart rate variability is this or that, maybe you want to rest today, or maybe you want to go and exercise, or here's a little meditation you could do. So a similar thing, but then working with this consciousness technology. And if anybody wants to follow up more and get like the updates when the products come out, if you go to weirdexperience.org, there's a newsletter there people can sign up to, and we can we'll be letting people know once the first products are out. So that's kind of what we're up to. As you see, it's basically an attempt to get artifacts into the world that challenge our current way of thinking about reality, but also encourage us to work more consciously with that field of consciousness, become literal co-creators with reality, which is, I think, what we were really born to do. So,
well, I can certainly say, and Tom, I'm sure you have a number of comments, having been in the trenches of organizational development and leadership and all the rest of it. I want you both to know that you have targets on your backs, obviously, for the trouble you're about to create in taking traditional organizational structure and throwing it right out the window on a lot of levels,
Well, George, it's funny you should mention targets on your back, because we've actually just created our first merch as Weird Experience. And one of them has the weird logo on the back, and it says, "Make me look, stare here." Because there's this Rupert Sheldrake research into the feeling of being stared at. So that you've got this on your back, and the idea is, people try to make you turn around by staring at your back. Yeah. Karsten, did you want to add anything?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is tremendous. You see the potential that we are just discovering here, and with all of the work that the Peer Lab has already started. But I want to leave the product part of it and the technical application part of it aside for a moment and pick up one of the statements that have been made beforehand about the shadow side of technologies. I mean, we have got a lot of technologies developed or seen being developed over the last decades, particularly. And the question really is, how do we apply these technologies, right? Do we apply them for the good or for the potentially bad, right? I mean, nuclear forces basically can be used for various purposes, right? So I think there is this question of the shadow side or not. And particularly in leadership, I think there is a huge potential that we see in order to harness and to develop these technologies so that they can become really applicable, so that we really develop tangible applications over the years and decades to come. But I think there is another aspect in leadership, particularly when we talk about leadership transformation, and that is the underlying ethics. And the underlying ethics are actually really important when it comes to addressing some of the leadership challenges that we see around the globe at that very moment, right? Because a lot of the problems that we face in our individual lives, in the business, but also on a global scale, there would be solutions for that, right, already. So it's not that we need to invent totally new solutions, right? So it's not the case that we are actually running out of ideas. No, the ideas are there, but it's then the decisions that we are taking. So leaders take decisions, and leaders take decisions on in front of a certain backdrop of their understanding, right? And if that backdrop actually all of a sudden changes from the world is separate and I'm just fighting for myself towards we are all one, and my colleague here is just another aspect of myself, that will have a tremendous leadership impact in terms of the decisions taken by leaders. So I look at that in two ways, right? There is the technological application of all of these gadgets and all of these sound technologies that can be developed on the back of the research that Peter has just introduced. And the other is really the shift, the transformation of leaders and leadership cultures itself, right? And that combination, I think, that will change the world. So I think we need to look at both, right? And the reason why I'm so excited about that here is, as Peter has rightly emphasized, if we put these lamps into meeting rooms, or if we basically provide research tools for information field research, right? Like we do with these REGs as well in another product line. So if we do this, we basically facilitate an awareness creation process, right? And that is what needs to happen at that very moment. So I would also want to manage expectations. I mean, the technologies that we are developing at that very moment, you will not within the next 2 years be able to switch to remote control your telly with your thoughts only, right? We are not quite there yet, and we are certainly not there that you actually drive your car just without a steering wheel, just by sort of thinking about now I should go left or right. That's not where we are right now. It might actually happen that will develop over the years and decades, right? So I'm really positive about that, but I just want to also manage expectations. But the interesting thing we need to look at is the what if scenario. What if this underlying information field, which I always draw the similarities to the underlying electromagnetic field, which we now master, right? What if this information field is really the basis of everything, and which is also can then be an identity, so that I start to identify myself with the information field rather than with my little body and my little mind here, right? And this identity shift actually facilitates that ethical shift. And I think that will also have a huge impact. So we have got two things. We have got the technological development based on the technological research, and we have got the ethical shift or leadership transformation, basically, which in combination will actually be a catalyst for the global change.
There goes I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'd like to pick up on that comment in particular, Karsten, but I want to go back to something Peter said first about the plants and how the plants can regulate the light. And it reminded me of some research that His Holiness the Dalai Lama did with the Max Planck Institute in Germany to measure the level of consciousness of rocks, of what we've historically thought of as inanimate objects. And they were able to scientifically prove that everything has consciousness. And so when you were talking about the plants regulating the light, didn't surprise me, Peter, because it was consistent with that research. But picking up on your comment, Karsten, when we look at so many particularly in industry, so many business leaders, but it's certainly in our political arena as well, so many of our leaders are sociopaths. And so many of our organizations are comprised of people who are narcissists. And so when I think about this work and what you're doing, that I could envision us really bumping up against those behaviors and exposing many of these leaders for who they are with the technology.
Yeah, I think you see, I hold an accreditation as a psychotherapist as well. Hence, I'm always very very careful before I call people sociopaths, right? But obviously there is a certain tendency here to behave in this way. But the real question that I'm asking myself is whether this is a really inherent quality of these individuals, or whether this is just because they have been brought up and conditioned in the wrong way, based on a wrong understanding on who they are and how reality literally works. So if the latter is the case, right, we could potentially correct that. If they are true sociopaths, I mean, okay, then it's more difficult. But I would say there is a good chance that a lot of the leaders who behave to the best of their knowledge, right, at that very moment in their worldview, they basically do plausible things, right? I mean, they look at individual kind of targets. They try to defend their position, their individual position, the position of their company, the position of their country, right? This is all fine, right? But it's all a symptom of the worldview that they hold and maintain, right? So what we basically do is if we exchange the backdrop, if we actually exchange the old paradigm worldview and replace it with a new paradigm worldview, then all of a sudden the leaders will turn around and say, oh, this is reality, right? And then they will probably adapt as well. So I wouldn't, again, I like the idea to tee it off as sociopaths, but I think there is hope because not all of them have any kind of sort of really mental illnesses here. I think it's just that they don't understand how reality really works.
Yeah, and certainly the organization culture can help foster and feed that behavior that's not appropriate.
Yeah. And I think that, but I think, some of what Tom is talking about, if you think about where we are when we talk about climate change and the actions that need to happen, and the companies and organizations that are dead set against those actions taking place. What you're really doing is you're giving humanity tools to completely redefine what leader means. It's as if you are taking a giant pyramid and you're turning it upside down. And we're going to be asked to discover that the real wisdom, the real leadership comes from the base of the pyramid, coming into coherence and alignment, rather than on the skills of somebody that is immensely overpaid for pretending that they know where we're supposed to be going and what we're supposed to be doing. So I think realistically, the idea of beginning this revolution in people's homes and in other places where they can begin to become accustomed to that unified field, probably will meet a hell of a lot less resistance. Because I got to tell you, those lamps in Congress or those lamps in most corporate boardrooms would be dark an awful lot of the time, that's not to say that I don't have hope for the possibility that humanity has and for what consciousness can do. Anyway, I love your trajectory. And I think that there are a lot of people. I mean, I can even remember when you talked about the mood, the lamp. Do you remember the mood rings that people used to wear in the 60s? There's a lot of great stuff here. I want to applaud you both for the work that you're doing and the innovation and the imagination that you're bringing to it. So where do we go next in the iteration of getting from the beginning of these technologies and these uses to actually the transformation of humanity?
Yeah. So I think it needs obviously further research, right? I mean, we are basing our technologies on the RAGs, so the deviation from chance and randomness, as Peter has already said, right? But there are different means to basically measure this, what I call the information field, right? This global consciousness, right? So it depends really what we would want to do. If we need to really get accuracy into it, if we really need to have really fine-tuned measures of the information field, we need to refine our methods to interact with the information field, obviously, right? So that is, the more fine-tuned the product needs to be, the better we need to understand how to interact with the information field. So that is from a technological base. And I think we need to also put the various research activities together. So we need the neuroscientists, we need to have the quantum physicists, we need to have all of these guys sort of contributing in order to do the base research. But if we assume that the baseline research is actually happening and it's getting together, I think what we then need to do as the next thing is we need to A, develop the applications, and B, teach people about the existence of this information field, and not just these communities who already have bought into that. And that is the interesting thing, because we have got a lot of communities, like probably the ones that we all know about. We have got a lot of communities who just feel it, they know it, that they know that it is there, right? But the scientific contribution here is that you produce facts, you produce statistically relevant evidence. So this is basically opening up a new market, if I may use my business term, right? The market of the skeptics, right? The market that has not yet opened up for these kind of thoughts. That's what's currently happening when we introduce these technologies, because these technologies start to do something. They start to behave weird, as Peter was rightly saying, right? And this weirdness causes a question mark in people's mind. And the skeptics see, well, this lamp is, or this gadget is behaving weird, right? And the skeptics then start to ask themselves, why? And that is then the next level. And so we are evolving like hand in hand, like step by step. We are evolving the technological part, and we are evolving the awareness, and then the technological part and the awareness. And that is how I see this path going on. And if you ask me really on what I think we need to, ideally, if I would come up with a wish list, I think we need to have people who understand that story, who understand that message and carries it out to the world. And honestly, I think we need to have people who support that also financially, because the research activities, I'm not talking for our research, but I'm talking about this research field. I think we just need to have more people focusing on that, and more scientists also being brave enough to look at this new kind of journey, rather than just being very conservative and just trying to secure their own careers, and hence doing only the research, which is classical kind of research.
Peter, what about you? What are the key steps? I mean, in some way or another, what you're really doing is creating a truth monitor. You know, a truth, integrity, coherence monitor, whatever you're calling it. And considering the number of people that are in hiding, that have been avoiding this for decades and centuries, I'm telling you, you two are real troublemakers.
I think, well, yeah, that's the point, George. But I think, you know, the possibility once, like Carsten said, if it puts a question mark, and then the question mark leads to a kind of new possible belief or understanding around the nature of reality, then all sorts of things start to spring from that. It's, well, okay, if indeed we are all interconnected, and there is an information field, and in that dimension time isn't linear, which is also, and we can be anywhere in space, then what does that mean for the way we design and run our organizations, our communities, and everything else? And it has serious implications. You know, simple things are, and I've got on my to-do list, is like develop a training for kind of PSI for executives, you know, because actually think how useful that will be. If you can get an intuition before something's manifesting, and learn to trust that, and learn how that information feels in your body, then that's a big advantage. If you can hold the field of a group in such a way that the solutions that emerge from that group are more than the sum of the parts, then that's a competitive advantage. You know, that's going to help you achieve your goal more effectively. But what you find is, when people start to get into that world, like Carsten referred to, it has a major effect on the ego, because the ego is trying to hold in place a belief. An ego I'd say that the healthy ego is obviously the sense of self, which is a healthy thing. But when it gets into the place where it believes it's separate from everything else, that's the unhealthy thing. So what this is going to do is, you know, when you start to get into that world, you can't avoid, it's just part of the package, all right? That sense of separate self, it's the nail in the coffin, or as Wolf, who was our researcher says this is the nail in the coffin for materialist science. And I mean, some of the research that we've been doing recently, and maybe this is the way it's going to go, George, you never quite know what the channel's going to be, but we have partners in the healthcare systems in Spain, for example, who we have been putting these REGs into intensive care units and noticing. So there's no physical connection, right, between the person and this device, and tracking what happens when somebody passes away. And you get a serious structure in the random field. So that's telling us that something non-physical and non-material, because according to material and physical science, nothing can influence these devices. So they can't counter the fact that something else must be going on then. The moment that someone passes away, you get a peak in these fields. So that's telling us the moment of death is something more than a physical event, which a lot of us feel intuitively. But here's science based on 28 years of research at Princeton's engineering department demonstrating that fact, showing that as the family comes into the room or when the priest arrives, you get a peak in the field. So there's something else going on that we don't understand. And that's the key, to plant that seed of doubt. Like Carsten said, well, how can that be? Well, maybe we should go and take a look at the wisdom traditions, right? Maybe they can tell us, or the indigenous traditions, or wherever. So that quest, but just the fact that people start to ask that question, and now it's become so. People have been so startled by the results in Spain that now the ambulance services want them, so that when they go to events on the street and things, are in the ambulance, so that they can track the field essentially of what happens there. So this whole research is starting already into, well, what's actually going on? And that's the very first question is, well, let's gather the data and see what's happening. Like in the data they were gathering at Princeton, it was primarily the quantity of data, the quantity of impact you were having. But Wolf was now working with these twin REGs and is noticing other correlations that you can actually maybe start to discern the quality of the energy through the pattern that you're seeing in the data, not just the quantity as well. It's so that suddenly, but we're in Dutch you say in the kinderschoenen, in the baby shoes, this at the moment, right at the very early days of working this out. But once it takes off, you can imagine the excitement. I mean, it's like a new enlightenment, essentially. It's like, a new phase of human research. But the beauty of it is that it's grounded in this context of deep interconnectedness. So at last, we're kind of getting back to the place that's really home for us, rather than living in constant stress, because deep down we know that the way we're doing things at the moment is completely not who we are, and not the way that best affirms all of life around us. So I think it'll be viral, in a positive way, because there's enough people out there now who I think for whom the idea of interconnectedness now is not a crazy idea. Right, there's enough people have been doing. If you look at the developmental psychology and stuff, you can see in the way that yoga and these kind of things have taken off, and mindfulness and stuff. That's kind of an acceptable thing. So once you start to bring in the science and the technology that proves it, and the gadgets that work with it, then I can only see it snowballing. Yeah.
And I just like to add a quote which apparently Leonardo da Vinci said or gave, and that is, there are three classes of people: those who see when they are shown, and those who don't see. And this is about, we show them the existence of the information field, we show them the interconnectedness. And some of them, the first group, already sees this because they are already there, they know this. The second group, we show them and they see it when we are showing it. And the third group are those, even when we try to show, or even when we show it to them, they won't see it. So from a transformational point of view, we should not waste any energy on the third group, honestly, right? we should support the first group, those who see, by giving them more arguments, more backup information, so that they can be multipliers, that they can actually spread the word. And we should therefore also particularly focus on those who see when they are shown, right? And that is a huge distinction here. So in terms of who do we address? And also to your point of George, about being troublemakers, right? I mean, we are troublemakers for those who don't see, even if we show them, right? But we are probably not necessarily troublemakers, but we are contributors, valuable contributors to those who see when they are shown, right? So yes, there are troublemakers, fair enough, but let's just work with the right audience, I shall say, right? Let's work with those people who are receptive, who actually understand, who see what's going on, and who probably are new to this field, but are open enough, right? And hence would want to learn more about it. So we have got these three groups that Leonardo was referring to. And I think we just need to be smart on who we work with.
So picking up on that point, IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, has been around for decades. George mentioned Larry Dawsey. He's been writing about this for decades. We've got HeartMath has been around for several decades. What is it about the world now that it seems that there are more people who see or could see if supported? What's shifted in the world consciousness from your perspective?
Well, it's because they've been around, Tom. If you understand the kind of field dynamics, what it's done is it's created a pattern in the field that is easier for other people to find. Or Ken Wilber would call it a cosmic groove. And that groove has just got deeper and broader, which is making it easier somehow for others to be able to download an insight or to see things that way. So the field of consciousness that resonates, the morphic field, or maybe as Rupert Sheldrake would say, in this domain is growing. And so I think that's what's changing. And at some point, you hit this tipping point where it suddenly becomes normal. Everyone kind of goes, yeah, I've always thought like that, but I didn't dare to, say it. And suddenly it moves over the kind of early adopter, midpoint into the late adopters and cascades through. And I do think that COVID may have helped at that level, because it forced a lot of people to slow down and stop. Because we can easily get caught up in the patterns of our everyday activity, rushing from this to that and surrounded by this world that's reinforcing a mindset of separation. That once we stopped, I think that did trigger a lot of people. Actually, may have given us a little kind of boost on the way.
I think that what you're both and all talking about is true in terms of the groupings, the where to perhaps direct attention. But I really believe that no matter what group we are in, this concept of completely redefining authority, completely redefining the nature of cooperation and collaboration, completely redefining our ability to measure truth and integrity and all of these qualities is something that will impact everyone, whether they can see, whether they're ready to see, or whether they can't see. I mean, just imagine a parent dealing with a child and the amount of non-truth that passes for authority in a parental-child relationship. Think of the every aspect of society in which there are people in positions of power or authority. This is not just an evolutionary disruption. This is a revolution of extraordinary proportion. And it may very well be that what's going to be required is that many of us who are on the planet now move on, and new generations coming in who are wired and more receptive to the consciousness that you're talking about will be naturals. Anyway, I'm not discouraging what you're doing. I'm applauding it and celebrating it. But I realize that there is no ground that I'm aware of in society that will remain unshaken by the possibilities that you're communicating.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to add what the Quero shamans in the Andes would basically, how they would call that transformation, they would call it a shift from the Homo sapiens to the Homo luminous.
Yes.
Right. And we are basically, I think, I mean, when I'm talking to business leaders have certain terminologies, right? And they talk about disruptive megatrends, right? And they find IT being a very disruptive megatrend. I can just tell you, IT is peanuts in comparison to what we are talking about here.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And
The authority question is interesting, George, because the question is then where does the authority come from?
yes.
And I was pondering that in my role as, managing director at Ubiquity and having been in a leadership role there for a while. And, the key decisions, Carsten was talking about leaders taking decisions, the key decisions, strategic decisions, all came through moments of inspiration. They came from the field.
Yes.
The name of Humanity Rising was something that came through me one early morning when I was in that twilight zone, kind of half awake, half not awake. And I was like, what is this thing that we're, that's coming through? Boom. Humanity Rising. Oh, of course. There we go. And Jim was something, Peter came up with the name. I could never say it that way because I didn't come up with the name. The authority lay elsewhere. The name came through me. And same with a number of, recent strategic decisions for Ubiquity as well. So it's when the authority shifts from somebody believing that they're a separate individual who's going to, think up the decision all on their own and be the brilliant person to think that up and deliver it, to more of a surrender and a kind of humble request to the universe to tell us what the hell we should be doing next. And when you do, but that does require really authentic surrender, you get the answer. So the authority lies elsewhere. But I can tell you that it's because I've been, in leadership roles many, many years, and I've been, also in the activist movement, and then the difference between believing you're the one who has to make the difference and go out there and change the world and everything else, and all the weight that puts on your shoulders and all the ego that activates, to knowing that actually you can never know it yourself, and that there is a bigger plan you can never understand, but that you're looking for guidance each step of the way. That's such a weight off your shoulders. It reduces the stress completely. All you know is you need to have a clear intention, and then you need to pay attention to how life wants to manifest that intention. So you don't have to come up with the plan, because if you make a 5-year plan, take the first step, the plan's out of date because life has changed. So it radically changes your quality of presence as a leader, and the way you it opens. It's a much more playful and curious place, because that ultimately the authority lies elsewhere.
Yes.
And we heard that yesterday. David Schmidt, who joined us, was sharing that many of the creations that his company has come up with have come from source, or from someplace outside of himself. Yeah.
Johanna asks, what does love have to do with it? And I know you asked this every time, don't you, Johanna? Because I remember you've asked it before. But interestingly enough, a lot with these technologies, because what they found was in the Princeton research, this is one of the most fascinating things, that it was the people who had the biggest effect, or the biggest effect was when you combined a clear intention with heartfelt attention. Intention and attention. And they found, when they were looking at the data, that men were better at moving the line in the direction that they wanted to move it, but they got relatively small results compared to the women. The women got big results, but not always in the direction they wanted it to go. And so if you just take archetypes, masculine and feminine archetypes, then the masculine archetype is more the mind and the intention, the directionality. Let's say the feminine archetype more the heart and the felt sense, which amplifies the intention. That's what happens. The heart amplifies the intention. And it was the combination of those two that got the biggest effect. And in fact, it was people who were in love, couples or groups, who had the biggest effect of all on any of the data that was happening. So love has a lot to do with it, Diana.
And if I may just,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say, I mean, the engineer in myself was pondering about love, really, because an engineer needs a definition, right? And the most suitable definition that I came up with around love is that love is the dissolution of boundaries. So love means fading away of boundaries. So the more we love, the less we perceive boundaries. And so the ultimate love is there are no boundaries, hence there is no separation. Hence, the ultimate love is what is the information field, or what is this global consciousness, right? So even as an engineer, by putting the right definition there, I can make a lot of sense, or I can attach a lot of sense to the word love, just by defining it as love is the dissolution of boundaries.
You know, Tom mentioned David Schmidt. After our program yesterday, I had an exchange with David, and I told him a very short story. I'm a sculptor when I'm not doing other things. And I was introduced to my form of sculpting by an old Spaniard named Jose de Creft, who introduced me to a thing called direct carving. And direct carving is to carving what improvisation is to jazz, you know? And one day he came into my studio and I was really upset and frustrated. And he said, "What's going on?" And he was 93 at the time, and I was in my 30s. And he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, this damn piece, it's taking forever for me to find what it wants to be, you know?" And he told me two things that changed my life. The first was, he said to me, "George, how long has it taken that stone to get to you?" And we were talking about marble, and marble takes 250,000 years just to form in the surface of the earth, let alone get quarried and all the rest of it. So I felt about this big at that point. And then he said to me, he said, "You've got it turned around." He said, "The music isn't your job." He said, "The music is God's job." He said, "Your job is to become the very best instrument you can, so that the music that plays through you is as clear and pure and sacred as it can be." And so I think ultimately what you both are doing and what the teams that you're working with are doing is you're devising some opportunities for people to get feedback on how good of an instrument they are, so that that music can blow through them. And you deserve a hell of a lot of credit for what you're doing. And we're getting close to the end here. And so I want to ask Jim to come back in, because he always has his own perspectives and comments. Jim, you want to come back in and join us?
Yes, thank you, Peter and Karsten. This is just an amazing session, very inspiring. I wanted to pick up on Tom's comment some time ago about the sociopath, because I think this is another dimension that is worth exploring in relationship to what we're discussing, bearing in mind, Karsten, your admonition that it's not so easy to define sociopaths, but let's just say people that reside on the dark side. And I would love to have you both comment on this, because as I would understand it, the coherence lamp, say, Peter, or the capacity to affect the random generator is a function not so much of ethics, but a function of will. And history has shown that some of the greatest manifestations of will that affect reality come from people that are residing on the dark side. And there's been obviously a lot of examples of that. But I wanted to have both of you speak to us about the relationship between clear intention that obviously to those who see, referring to Leonardo da Vinci, understand that intention affects reality, particularly when it's backed up by strong emotion, and how that plays itself out in terms of the technologies that you're developing with people who, as Tom was mentioning, aren't as well intentioned as we would like them to be.
Yeah. Well, actually, Tally just answered the question, but unfortunately, she only sent it to the hosts and panelists. So send the comment to everybody, Tally. But she said, agreed, intention is like will, but with surrender. And that's a really good summary, because what they found is that if you're trying to affect, let's say, the device and have the lines go up, is you have to imagine the end result, like, say, the line going up the top of the screen. And then you actually have to let go of that attention. You actually have to surrender and awaken the curiosity. And if you, the harder you try, then exert your will, the less effect you have. So it's like there was this law that they discovered in the research, which they ended up calling the release of effort effect. And they found that it was the moment you stop trying that the effect happened. So anything that is contracted energy actually prevents the effect happening. And as you know, a will that is coming out of anger or fear is a contracted energy, and that means it doesn't actually flow. The communication loop doesn't flow, and so there is that built-in protection, as it were, I would say.
Good point.
That means that the
surrender effect.
Yeah, and what that is the humility of knowing that you can't control reality, because there's 96% of reality we don't understand, as the scientists say. And so all you know is you can have a clear intention, and if you have a clear intention which is also connected to the heart energy, that's the other thing of attention that amplifies the intention, then you increase the likelihood of that reality manifesting, but there's no guarantee, and you don't know how it's going to manifest. That's up to life. So it's then about paying attention and noticing the synchronicities that enable that to happen. So it's very different from a linear directionality kind of, well, I'm going to make that happen and it's going to go like this. That's not how it works. So it has a different dynamic to it. But Tally summarized it, I think, beautifully there. Carsten, would you add something?
Yeah, there are three ideas that popped up when I was listening to you, to the question and to your answer. The first one is like when you actually shoot an arrow, basically you aim, you target, you set the intention, and then you shoot and you let go. This is letting go, right? And letting go means then the arrow is actually flying, and you don't run next to the arrow and try to push it, right? So the intention is really what drives it. And then you need to trust that the arrow hits the target. So that is the first thing that I wanted to say. The second remark I wanted to bring is that I do believe that through wisdom traditions, one can increase the level of impact that we have with our own intention on the bigger reality. What I mean, I call it shamanic horsepower when I talk about that. I think we can all increase our shamanic horsepower, right? I think we probably come to this world with a certain baseline of shamanic horsepower, but when we then start working, I think we can increase it. This is when we evolve as individuals. I think higher evolved individuals have got more shamanic horsepower. That's what I wanted to say. And the third thing I wanted to just mention, this is just sort of probably to leave it to think about that, because the introduction, the question was really about the dark side. And I just want to phrase it as a question, because if we still assume that there is a dark side versus there is another side, have we then really understood that it's all one?
Wonderful question. Wonderful. And I think that even if we narrow that view and we look at what we have perceived throughout history as people with less than conscious intentions and the impact that they have had on the world, there's no doubt that they have been, in terms of the perception of consciousness, they have been disruptors. And yet, no matter what their disruption, their reign is limited always. And from it then comes a new level of understanding. Now, unfortunately, history seems to be a lot of repetition. We're slow learners. But in truth, I think, Jim, that I can't name a historical figure who has been called evil or has created real challenge, whose reign has not been limited. And yet, those in the wisdom traditions who have approached it differently, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 years, their message lives on, their essence impacts society. So I don't know how to answer it, but I think Karsten hit the nail on the head, and I'm grateful to you for that last question.
Well, thank you for that. It's obviously an immense issue, as is the whole issue of consciousness itself. But what I wanted to end with, Peter and Karsten, is humanity rising. You know, it'd be wonderful to come on from time to time and lead our community in some coherence exercises. I don't know, Peter, whether you put your lamp on your desk up and we all try to think of it being red or blue as an exercise and see whether our virtual community could actually make changes. But what I'm taking from this, George and Tom, as we think about next year, I would like to think about building practice, collective practice around intention into Humanity Rising broadcasts, so that we begin to build the muscle tissue that you're talking about, Peter and Karsten, because it's really simple. You know, it's not rocket science, as they say, and it's in the doing that the confidence is bolstered and the lessons are learned. So I'm just wondering whether either or both of you would be open to that kind of engagement with Ubiquity as Humanity Rising, as we move into the new year. And the reason why I'm saying this is because my sense of 2023 is that the contradictions are going to be heightened. The escalation of climate turbulence is going to become more intense. The deconstruction of the global infrastructure is going to accelerate. And this is one reason why we do the breathing every day. And what we've noted is we've all done the breathing. If for some reason I get caught up and I miss it, people immediately draw that to my attention, because the coherence exercise right at the beginning has become very important to our community. So anyway, I just would love to build in some sessions with you guys to enhance our capacity. Maybe we could even do it next Monday, Tuesday, Peter, because we're going to be doing 2 sessions next Monday and Tuesday as a follow-up of Technologies of Hope on modern day magic. And maybe that's an opportunity to do this. So anyway, I just want to engage both of you in an ongoing partnership with our community, because I believe this capacity, not only for coherence, but collective intention, could prove to be more important than we can possibly imagine as life unfolds.
Jim, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because one of the things that we are designing is spaces between the programs for precisely that kind of experience. It's going to be woven all the way through. And I also want to just say that I'm fascinated by the fact that the concept of humanity rising is now becoming a concept called Humanity Rising Network, which is talking precisely about the web that needs to be created in order to make this different. So I just want to say a couple of things about tomorrow. And tomorrow, those of you who are women in the audience who have been patient all week, with the exception of Lila June Johnson on Monday, tomorrow we're going to have 2 extraordinary women on our program. And we're going to be talking about what did we call it? Solving societal and planetary issues. So we welcome you to that and look forward to it. And thank you very much, as usual, for being here, especially those of you who are really getting brilliant at the chats.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Tom, Peter, Karsten. This has been a wonderful session. I can hardly wait for next year as we build in these enhanced capacities to our global community. This has been very, very inspiring. And that will bring us to a close for today, everyone. Tomorrow, we'll dive into the 4th day of Technologies of Hope, as George just indicated. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box, and we'll say bye for now. See you tomorrow. And Karsten and Peter, many, many thanks. This was brilliant, man. This was brilliant.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Everyone.